I do want to thank again the folks at NYU and Georgetown for pulling this together. Having worked in the justice system for close to 30 years, I can say with pretty good confidence that I think 10 plus years ago when you said alternate first response or alternate emergency response, most people wouldn't know what you're talking about. And thanks to all of the innovation that you've been talking about across the country, there is now a community nationally of people working on this. And I would like to think that we'll all remember this event as a time when everybody came together to really fully establish this field. So thank you to NYU and Georgetown for pulling us together. Over my career, most of it has been focused on working with state and local and federal government and philanthropy to really figure out how to take good ideas to scale. And where's the Denver Star program, folks? Or anybody here from Denver? I remember, I think one of the folks said that right now the program is able to serve as successful as it's been 1 out of every 4 people, I think, that, or 3, I can't remember what the ratio is, but there's a ways to go so that it can actually be operating at the scale where it would actually meet demand. And so the question that we have for this panel, for all the programs that are out there, is you can all imagine yourselves being much bigger in order to fully meet the demand that exists in the community for your services. You've all talked about ways in which the programs that you administer would actually be considered a full part of the spectrum of services that government offers, something that the community is familiar with. I think everyone has a general vision of what that would look like, but we are a ways away from being there today. And we want to talk to this panel about what it would take to get from where we are now to that kind of vision 10 years from now. So with that, what I'm going to ask is each of our terrific panelists just to briefly introduce themselves. So just a quick explanation on your background, and then I will start with the questions. So Cal, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Cal Jenkins, and I'm Manager of Research and Evaluation with the PEGS Foundation of Ohio. And through our Clear Pathways initiative, we've been exploring this space of 911 and 988 interoperability. Just for a little bit of context on what the Clear Pathways initiative is, our goals are to reduce unnecessary hospital emergency department admissions, jail bookings, and interactions with law enforcement for people who are experiencing a behavioral health crisis. And so with those goals in mind, it's been my role to explore locally what it would look like for 911 and 988 agencies to coordinate so that calls are connected to the appropriate resource regardless of what number has been called. And so I'm excited to talk more about that.
Thanks, Cal. Ann?
Hey, everybody, it's Ann Larson here. So honored to be talking with you all today. I work for the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I've been there since February of last year, but before that, I was in Olympia, Washington, where I got hired in 2018 to implement the Crisis Response Unit, which is alternative law enforcement crisis response team. In coordination with that, we also started our Familiar Faces program, which I'm really thrilled about, where we asked our law enforcement officers in the downtown core to identify the top 10 to 20 people that they were having the most contact with, that they did not want to have the most contact with. And we partnered formerly incarcerated individuals to become permanent supportive people in those folks' lives. And it's just great to be here.
Thanks, Ann. Eric.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful to be in the space with you all today. I'm Eric Cumberbatch. I'm the Senior Vice President of Policy and Community Engagement at the Center for Police and Equity. My work is really geared around empowering community members to undo the legacy of white supremacy and institutions that are supposed to protect and serve us. Before joining the Center for Police and Equity, I worked at the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice as a deputy director. It's part of a fabulous team that launched the New York City Office to Prevent Gun Violence and the New York City Office of Neighborhood Safety. Looking forward to this discussion.
Amy, thanks, Eric.
Everyone, I'm Amy Watson. I'm on faculty at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I will be transitioning to Wayne State in August, but that's kind of where I call who signs my paycheck. Tell you a little bit more. I started my career as a probation officer on a specialist mental health team. And that's really where I got interested in police encounters with people with mental illness. And so for the past, I guess, over 25 years, I've been doing work around how those encounters are experienced by people with mental illness, but also looking at the crisis intervention team model. And came to a realization a few years ago that, we do need to work with police to help them be more compassionate and more effective when they do respond. But we've put a lot of attention on building a mental health system within the criminal justice system where it's really time and there's opportunity now to shift things back to other systems to better meet people's needs. So I have one of my projects that I'm most excited about is that we're looking at what are the skills and competencies and characteristics of alternative responders, and then thinking about how do you then develop that workforce.
Right, and that's an issue I know we'll be coming back to during the discussion. So terrific to have you all here. We're going to work through 3 sets of issues and then open it up for questions from the audience. We talked about, again, a vision for things operating at scale and operating in a systems level fashion. Let's talk about what you see as the single biggest obstacle to that happening. What is it that you think is really keeping you up at night that worries you about how we're going to accomplish that? Getting some strategies to dealing with that. Al, you want to start?
Sure. So I'll just ground us first in what happens when you call 911 and what happens when you call 988. When you call 911, that call taker is looking to, as quickly as possible, understand what it is that this caller may need and be a connection to a resource, whether that's law enforcement, fire, EMS, or another resource. That 911 call taker is quickly trying to be a connection point. When it comes to a 988 call, they have the added benefit of also being able to provide a telephonic service to the caller, such that they can resolve the call over the phone because they have some level of mental health training. But they can also be a connection point like 911, except they have more time to really be able to understand what is going on with that caller, more training to have an understanding of what could be going on with that caller, and more resources at their disposal to be able to connect that caller with. And so, that being said, just in that brief explanation, there's a difference of pace that these call takers get to work within. There's a difference of resources they have access to, and there's a difference of training that they're receiving to be able to handle these calls. And so given those differences, they're playing very fundamentally different roles. Given that they may not be necessarily inclined to trust one another. And that's completely fair, but it creates challenges for trying to ensure that a caller is, again, seamlessly connected to the appropriate resource. And so given that, it's too late when you're on the call to be able to start figuring out things such as caller consents, or when this call goes from being my call to being your call as the other agency, or what the expectation is for following up between each other, and so there has to be some coordination that's happening beforehand. And I think the challenge is, doing that pre-work to ensure that the caller has a good experience.
So Cal, your vision for a high functioning system would be the 988 call center and the 911 call center being able to move calls seamlessly between each other. But your sense is that trust does not exist right now in order to make that happen.
Correct.
Okay, well, we'll look more to you then for things we can do to address that level of trust in the next round of questions. Anne, your thought on the biggest challenge that's keeping you up?
The biggest challenge that's keeping me up is taking these really innovative and unique community-led programs and making them true to their communities. And then also, like, as we're going to talk about in a bit, scaling up and standardization. And so one of the things that I think about when I think about community response is how do we keep people in community? And then I also think about the workforce that is not tapped into is like returning community members. So how do we return people into community and have that be the community response? And so those are the things that keep me up at night, is just changing the culture and changing the idea that police are here to keep, that they're good people, protecting good people from bad people. And so if we're going to have a community response, how do we keep people there in community and how do we bring them back?
And help me out here, so that keep people in community, like if you can explain that, describe that a little bit more tangibly.
So that you're not getting arrested, so that you're not getting detained, so that we are working with the whole person, that we realize that they have a mom, or they have rent due, or they have this dog. Like, there's so many, humans are hard, which I learned from Cahoots. And I think we all know that, but like, how do we work as a community response that when we respond, we realize that the goal is to not take kids from their parents, or the goal isn't to have someone be removed from the community? And how do we look at the situation in that lens?
Got it. So when we return, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how best to address that in the workforce issue. Eric?
So what keeps me up at night is my 17-year-old son. And not that he's loud or disrespectful or any of those things, but more so for his safety. As a young Black man, how unsafe he is in America. So that keeps me up at night. I think the largest problem that we're facing is that we're building alternatives in response to white supremacy. And we're building alternatives in response to racist practices and policies that adversely impact Black and brown people and have traumatized Black and brown people across America. And while we're standing up these alternatives, we also have to be in a position to fight back against white supremacist practices. We will create alternatives forever and just be in a system of creating without going to the root cause. And the root cause of why we're here today is white supremacy, racist practices, racist policies, and the harm that puts on people. So that's the biggest problem that I see in America.
Eric, just give a sneak peek, if you will, as to what you see as key to addressing that challenge.
A racial reckoning. This country is scared to talk about its past, its history, its legacy, how that legacy manifests in institutions today, the culture of white supremacy. And, I'm not just calling out white supremacy for white people. There are conditioned Black people that practice white supremacy every day. So a racial reckoning that really deals with how do we come together? How do we heal together? What does that look like across institutions that are supposed to serve us? What does that look like in the political space? What does that look like on the individual level? Until we unpack and really address those root causes, we'll be having these conversations forever.
All right, to be continued. Amy, to you, biggest challenge?
I think it's kind of legitimacy of building something completely new, because we don't necessarily have a recognized workforce and role. So we have this wonderful work that's being done across the country where programs are building something that's really new. Other communities are, just trying to expand mobile crisis, which that could be a good thing, but it's not the same thing as an alternative response program. It brings with it the harms that we've seen with the mental health system as well. So I think really that legitimacy of this as a very new, built from the ground type of response, not just a minor tweaking of things that we have that are existing, that over time will really replicate some of the problems with our existing systems.
So let me pick up on that thread of workforce, because it's where we want to go next, and Ann signaled it as well. We all know across government, there's just a huge shortage of workers, period. And we're talking about jobs that don't pay especially well. We're talking about jobs that are extremely taxing on so many levels. And we're talking about jobs that often require certain certifications that schools are not keeping up with in terms of pumping people out. That is a huge set of challenges in terms of a workforce. And we're also going to talk about a workforce that has a kind of cultural competence, I think that Eric was alluding to earlier as well. So my gosh, I mean, what is a pathway forward in addressing some of those workforce challenges? Ann and Amy, your thoughts on this?
Well, I believe that experience is expertise. And I really I'll tell a quick story here. So in 2017, I saw a documentary called The If Project. I don't know if folks are familiar with it, but it's where a detective from Seattle went into the women's prison in Washington State and started like a writing program and a mentorship program. And so I went to this filming at a local college, and I met this woman named Melissa, and she's given me permission to tell her story. And she'd just gotten out of prison 2 days earlier, and she was working as a dog groomer. They learned how to do dog grooming in prison. And like me and my excited self and thinking I'm like such a great person, like, oh yeah, I believe in second chances. I'm like, I have a St. Bernard, I'll bring my dog to you, like thinking I'm doing something, magical here in my privileged self. And we stayed connected, and she was getting her bachelor's, and she reached out to me and she's like, I want to intern for you. And I'm a civilian at the police department, and she just got out of 11-year sentence in a women's correctional facility. And I'm a sucker for an intern. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, how am I going to do this? Like, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to like figure this out? So it's just kind of crafty. And I've always been a person that like asked for forgiveness later. And then long story short, she gets her bachelor's, and then a position opens up and she applies for it. And she has to write this letter to like, which is incredibly re-traumatizing, of like why she deserves to be trusted. Like she did everything, she's doing it all. And so like she wrote this letter, she got hired and at an outside agency and was doing the work in partnership with the police department. And I pushed so hard. I was like, no, you guys deserve to be city employees. You deserve to be police department employees. Like, we are going to change this culture. And I fought, and it happened. But the consequences of that were not known to me at the time was, we brought in formerly incarcerated individuals to work in the police department. They didn't have to do a polygraph. I was like on the line about that. They just needed to do what everybody did to become a city employee, but they couldn't use the bathroom without being walked down the hallway because they couldn't be in the police department without supervision. And so we need to look at expertise as experience. We need to remove barriers. We need to hire folks that when there is a crisis, that they're in, like they're going in, like they're not going the other way. And that's a unique personality. It's an attribute where you're comfortable in loud situations and dynamic situations. And I feel like we're just missing the mark on not accessing folks returning to community.
So I don't think there's gonna be a person here who disagrees with you on that observation. Talk to me about what's getting in the way of that happening. Obviously you talk about a general culture and mindset in the department, but what could people do that would actually change maybe that kind of just that general vibe that exists in the department?
Well, policies can change. So one of the things that happened also was that being formerly incarcerated is not a protected class. So people can treat you horribly. And so these folks come on, and the union refuses to represent them because the union represents corrections officers as well. So they don't ever reach out, and they don't include them in union negotiations. And so folks are paying their union dues and not getting representation, and there's no recourse. There's no hey, you can't treat me this way because I'm formerly incarcerated. It's not a protected class or a protected situation. And so I think, people need to go and do it and not have something horrible happen. Not every formerly incarcerated person wants to do this work. I'm not speaking on that, or that they're right for this work, but I think that you can prove that there are folks that can do it. They're doing a great job. And if you pay them equitably and treat them with respect, you're going to see movement. You're going to see women responding to women and not being afraid. Our female responders respond in all female teams, and they respond to other women because they understand gender responsive approaches. They understand, they've been through the system, and so they understand the damage that can happen just in those interactions. So I think you need to change policies, and I think you need to start and true allyship is like putting your own livelihood on the line. Like you have to be able to say like, this is the right thing to do. And I'm going to put my own professional, career on the line to do what's right.
And I think you also talked about giving people avenues when they're put in those situations to be able to lodge complaints, to be able to get some sort of relief. So thanks for those ideas and suggestions. Amy, your thoughts on the workforce challenge?
Similar to Dan, but more broadly, removing the barriers to entering the field, because many of the barriers that are in place don't relate to someone's ability to do the job. And some of the qualifications that are required in some places don't relate to the job either. And I'm in a college of social work, so maybe I'll get fired, but I personally don't think social workers are prepared to do this work. There are social workers doing it and doing it well, but we don't have enough social workers to hire even bachelor's or master's level social workers to do this work. And the skills that they learned in their social work training aren't necessarily the skills that they would need to do this job. I have a project that I'm working on with Leah Pope and Michael Compton, where we're doing interviews and focus groups with people about what are the characteristics, what are the skills and competencies that are needed for this work. And very few people have told us like a master's degree is really closely tied. And the few people that have said that actually then later in the same interview said, but the skills that I use every day aren't the ones that I learned in graduate school. So I think there's something, we're very stuck on having some formal qualifications for things. And by doing that, we're missing the people that will be best at this job. People with different types of experiences that make them the people that can walk into a situation that many people would be uncomfortable with and remain calm and really connect with the person that they're supporting. And oftentimes what we've heard from people that have had more of your mobile crisis type responses, they felt like the person was coming out with an agenda and a checkbox. And we have a great quote from one of our interviews about, are we seeing people as risks we need to assess or people we need to support? And I really think by going a different direction and recruiting people that by lived experience are well suited for this work, that are interested in doing this type of work. Most people don't get their master's in social work so they can work in the middle of the night on the weekend. Right now, I think one of the really popular things for people is that they can do telehealth. So they can make a decent living not getting off their couch. So we need to attract people that actually want to be out in the communities, are comfortable in the communities, are from those communities, that also have experiences that make them really well suited for connecting with people and helping to support them. And they may need access to a clinician because there are situations that there may be a clinical emergency, but it doesn't seem like that's the most effective thing to start with.
So let me just press both of you on to get really precise here on attention that we're constantly hearing. Someone flagged earlier the article in the Washington Post dropping the educational requirements. That many police departments are moving in that direction. Many governors are now basically saying, you don't need a college degree now for these jobs. A high school degree would suffice. That a high school degree would suffice. And what we're hearing from leaders in academia is we need to maybe rethink some of the training for these positions, and we need to make it these degrees more accessible. But we shouldn't be dropping altogether the educational requirements. Other people saying, no, this is a route to more equity. This is a route to sort of having employees that look more like the communities that we're serving. It makes it more engaging. No obvious answers on this one, but I'm wondering, given everything you're saying, I'm hearing you say maybe we have been a little bit too strict on the educational requirements for a lot of these positions. Agreed?
Yeah, and of course, academics are going to say they need academic training. But I think that training is important. But for a lot of this stuff, it's not, 6 years of training and a lot of debt for a job.
But even college degree, let's drop that.
Yeah, I don't think a college degree is necessary either. I think getting people that are interested in the work, that have the kind of some of the right characteristics and capacities to have some training and support to really develop into a professional that can go out there and do a really good job.
Is there any correlation between the fact that you're leaving your academic institution and you're, no, I'm just teasing.
I'm going to another academic institution.
The freedom, though, that comes with that. No, but it's a great point, and I know something is being actively debated in communities and states across the country. Let me now switch gears and turn to both Eric and Cal. When you talk and have worked a lot with people at the state level and the federal level, and the instinct of a person working in the legislature or in a regulatory body at the state or federal level is, what policy can we enact so that there's some consistency across the board? And so we can't have everybody doing their own thing. We need to make sure that there's a certain floor of expectations across the state. So that is one route, right, to achieving scale and consistency across the country. That's probably the worst thing you can be saying to anybody at the local or community level who says, if you've been to one county, you've been to one county. Every place is unique. You need to give us just the tools, the freedom, the flexibility. Let us do our thing. So my question to each of you, as you're pushing to address those challenges that you talked about earlier, would you like to see some standardization in terms of expectations, or is this more about letting every community figure this out on its own? Cal.
Yes. No, it's going to take both. And I think specifically when it comes to this 988 and 911 interplay, it's really too early to be able to tell where the lines are between how much customization and how much standardization. And I'll just give a few examples, though, of why both are at play here. When it comes to customization, in Ohio, we have 19 988 call centers, and they don't all have the same service array. And so, namely, some of them have mobile crisis teams that can provide an on-scene response, and some of them don't have any capability to provide an on-scene response. And so the way in which they need to coordinate with 911 differs. It doesn't mean it's any more or any less, but it's different things that they're going to need to consider for what they're going to need to be working on. And on the other hand, when it comes to standardization, any of the 988 call centers aren't just working with one 911 agency. There's going to be several in their coverage area. And even these examples are really reductionist. It's still way more complicated than this. But within a coverage area, if there's 20 911 public safety answering points, and these 988 call takers have to be trained on how to work with them, and there's no level of standardization, then that opens the door for there to be 20 different protocols for what that coordination would look like. And that's really an unreasonable expectation to have on the 988 call takers. And so there has to be some level of consistency for very practical purposes, such as just how do you train a call taker to do this work? And so, yeah, those are just like two small examples of why both are at play. But as I said before, it's really too early to know where the lines exist between how much this needs to be tailored to each community and how much it needs to be standardized at the state level.
But a great illustration of how in some cases a policy is inevitable and necessary, but in other cases, how you want to provide that flexibility. Thank you. Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the question is who? So standards, yes. Standards developed by who? And that's the real question. And for far too long, the people that are most impacted, the people that are closest to where we're seeking solutions are not the ones that have the power to create the standard. And that's the real issue here, is that we have people that are far removed that have hats of academia and hats of expertise and however folks want to describe themselves are the ones that are making the standards. So there's a lot of definition at play. Who are the experts? Who are the leaders? Who are the people that do this work? The people who are most proximal to the issue are the experts. And we have to flip the paradigm. And oftentimes, I'll use myself as the example. I have 2 degrees. I'm finishing my 3rd degree this winter. I say to everyone I work with, I'm only an expert at making mistakes and learning from them. The people that I work with in communities across the country, the people that have been impacted, the people that are resilient, that have lived through trauma day in, day out, and continue to do that, those people have an expertise like no other. And the practice that they have, when coupled with theoretical knowledge, that person is incredible. That is an asset. So yes, standards, but developed by who? And then the definitions, how are we defining who, what, how, all of those things have to come from the end user, not this patriarch kind of top-down hierarchy approach that we've seen for too long that has failed all of our communities.
So Eric, you talk about the end users, and let's talk about some of these large cities where a lot of these programs are based, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of end users, if you will. When we see federal solicitations now, state solicitations, foundations putting money out, everybody's talking about the importance of community engagement, right? So there's a lot of words out there that are consistent with what you're saying. I thought someone said earlier during one of the panels that the distinction between maybe who shows up at one of those meetings versus who's actually in touch with sort of the end user's experience, and the distinction there. You know, given just the vastness of the country, I mean, what litmus tests do you use to know whether you're truly in touch with the end users versus something that's the appearance of being in touch with the end users?
Yeah, I think, you know, the word community is like one of those words that's going to go over on my list of like the banned words. Like it's working its way up to that point. But I think it's a safe word that where we hide things inside. Like we're scared to call out who we're actually talking about, and we just say the community. And that's really problematic and an issue. The litmus test, I would say, you know, a person who has lived experience, a person who comes from resiliency, a person who has persevered and has strength and wisdom and creativity from all of their life experiences can go into any community, navigate within that community, build camaraderie within that community, and empower individuals to be the ones that take ownership and are at the forefront of change. And that's exactly what we did in New York City from 2014 to roughly 2020 with the Office of Neighborhood Safety and the Office to Prevent Gun Violence, which was empowering people that were formerly involved in crew and gang violence, gun violence in particular, to be the ones that go back into their communities and work to lift people out of gun violence. And that's when New York City saw some of its lowest rates of gun violence in the history of New York City since New York City was tracking shooting incidents. So the expertise is on the ground, it's there. Are we going to recognize that it's there? Are we going to value that it's there? The experts don't have to sound like academics or professionals. They don't have to look like that. And I've been very fortunate enough to have individuals who saw that in me and invested in me. I stepped into spaces where I was one of a few, if not the only, Black men in a leadership position in a mayoral criminal justice office, which I was there to blow up. I was not there because I support criminal justice systems. And I made that very clear from the jump. When I got there, not only did I build and scale out projects and programs, but I hired people from the communities that other people were making policies about and for that did not reflect those communities, did not reflect the people in those communities, did not sound like them, couldn't even have a vision for what that person in that community is capable of doing. So really lifting up people, lifting up the power of people, recognizing that, seeing that, valuing that. And I think it goes to the educational piece as well. How did we land in a space where we value education based on a cut point criteria when the most intelligent people that I've spoken to, we were working to close Rikers, the city jail. We're working to close Rikers. The most intelligent people that could tell me and inform me on how to close Rikers were the people who were housed in Rikers, not the academics, not the researchers, not the politicians. The people that are impacted have the solutions. Are we bold enough? Are we radical enough to embrace that? And that's the real issue.
Terrific, thank you. And would love to come back to you as to then how we set up those people for success and not for failure once we put them in those jobs in incredibly stressful situations. But before we go there, let me turn back to the full panel and ask you now to look ahead. over the next 5 to 10 years? You talked about some of the key challenges that you spotted. We talked about workforce being central to that, the tension between standardization and customization. What would you like to see? What do you think is going to be key from your standpoint in terms of, whether you've got philanthropy in the room, government in the room, nonprofits? What would you like to see as a key focus going forward that'll be key to our success 5 to 10 years from now? Cal, you want to start?
Firstly, I wish I was working with a team of like 10 to 20 people on this. But just outside of the organization that I'm working with, I wish that there were more organizations like it. And so I'm speaking of the Clear Pathways initiative particularly, and it's because we get to be kind of a neutral convener between system partners that are working with 911 and that are working with 988. We know this work can be a bit territorial. And again, I mentioned the trust earlier. We play a role where we can help to facilitate that. And so that's kind of at the across level, but also when we talk about up and down governmentally, we work with local partners and we also work with state partners. And that gives us the ability to go into these local communities and hear what folks are saying and hear what their challenges are and raise them up to the ears that may not have heard these things because there's so many counties, there's 88 counties, and it's rare that 1 or 2 of them are going to be able to get their specific local needs heard by these folks at the state level. And then other way around as well, because we're keyed into what's happening with the state, we can take the information that might be most responsive for these local communities and bring it to them so that their local work is in alignment with the state's overall vision, such that they're not kind of roadblocked if something does come down that they hadn't heard about quite yet. And so just returning to the fact that Clear Pathways gets to span all of these different groups and also gets to provide support and guidance to folks who have a day job. Everyone doesn't just get to stop and focus on how we're going to work together. They have the day-to-day things that they're still doing, and there's no one entity that's been tasked with figuring out 911, 988 interoperability. And so as much as we can, be a support, be a guide, be a listening ear to these folks to help smooth some of these things out. I think that's a key role in this work. And I wish there were more organizations that could kind of exist in that boundary spanning space.
I think we're all slurring our words at this time of day. So well said. Anne?
Looking into the future, I think just professional partners. I mean professional, like they are viewed as equal partners in the first response landscape. And to get there right now, at least in Olympia, if 2 crew folks call out, the crew unit's not going out that day. But if 2 officers call out, they're going to call officers in for overtime. There's minimum man and staffing. So how do we get community responders to be equal partners that are integrated into the first response landscape, that are at the same level of 24/7, 365 days a year, and getting paid, equal to police and fire, having the shift work, having that camaraderie, having that kind of bond with each other. I feel like even in Olympia, I was talking to some friends and they're like, our community responders didn't even know they were community responders. Like, there's other people out there like this. I'm like, yeah, there are other people out there. And so how do we make sure that when someone calls 911 or 988 or 311 and they need assistance 365 days a year, any time of the day, that they're going to get a community responder? So if that's union negotiations, minimum manning, like what that looks like, but that's what I would love to see in 5 years.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, very similar. I think, for far too long, we're given programs. So there's a program that you're doing or a project or an initiative instead of an institution that's part of the operating structure of a city or a locality. So institutionalizing these practices so that they're not easily just taken away or stripped in a next or future administration. Really having sustainability through legislation that makes this the norm as opposed to the alternative. So creating a new system that actually works to serve people, but creating that system with the people that it's intended to impact.
Thanks, Amy.
I think for starters, stop calling it alternative response so that it's not just a pilot program that we're trying. And I do think some standards of what it means when you say, I'll call it community response. What does that mean? What are we asking the community responders to do and expecting of them with doing it in a way that allows flexibility so communities can design their community responder program to best meet their needs. So it's kind of that balance there. I have this dream and that like 5 to 10 years out from now, we'll have a recognized role as community responder that has a professional classification, that has some recognized kind of components of training, not required qualifications per se, but what types of trainings do we need to provide to support people in this role, and decent pay as a first responder. Not all first responders get paid decently, I realize that. But if I've seen some of the programs that are housed within mental health agencies, people get paid like community mental health workers, which is not enough to live on. So really thinking that through so that it's recognized this is a valuable role to communities, and making sure that, making sure that it is valuable, that we don't do something that we just sort of tweak and repurpose something that we already have to make a political gain by saying, oh, we're doing something to get police out of this, but really building something and institutionalizing it as part of the response system.
So, terrific discussion. Thank you. I'm going to raise one other issue before we open it up for questions. It's a tension I've been wrestling with. One of the things we haven't talked about so far on this panel is money, and the money that's going to be necessary to finance these things at scale. And I'm curious from people's perspective, when you think about the kind of resources it's going to take to run these things at scale, how many people think that money can become exclusively from county and city government? That's certainly my sense too, that in order to scale these things, we're going to actually need funding from other sources outside of the locality, state and federal, namely. When we talk about mental health and substance use services, for example, the primary funding sources that we're going to be looking to for that are going to be Medicaid and commercial insurance. How many programs right now are seeing some of their services being paid for by Medicaid or commercial insurance? Okay, so just a couple of hands up. Here's the tension that I would like your help resolving. When you sit down with the people from Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna or other folks, they have a very formulaic way of looking at different types of services. They want to know exactly the qualifications of somebody who's going to provide a service. They want to know what the time period of interaction is going to be, what services are going to be provided, and where it's going to be provided. They will then give you a unit cost for each of those particular things. They want to know what the answers are to those questions that can be applied statewide. They don't want to hear about a difference that exists in Dayton, Ohio, or Lorain County, and everybody has their own arrangement kind of worked out, right? That's commercial insurance. It's the same with Medicaid, regulated at the state level. And so my question to you is, that is all at odds with what we have just been discussing so far in terms of providing sometimes flexibility, in terms of reimagining what some of these workers look like, in terms of so many of the things that we discussed. So help me navigate that tension. And I know there's no easy answer for it, but just any thoughts for us to kind of marinate on coming out of this conference? Amy?
I don't think we should use Medicaid or private health insurance to cover this unless it's a clinical emergency that requires a clinician. I think we need to figure out other ways of paying for this, because what we're thinking about is broader, and it impacts community well-being. So
let me press you. What's the other source?
Well, so Illinois is doing some great stuff with repurposing 10% of the cannabis tax revenue to pay for a lot of things. So they can serve people that don't have Medicaid or private insurance. Problem is when you're going with agencies that can bill insurance is that that's also limiting who you can hire, not just in qualifications, but oftentimes you can't hire someone with a criminal record, a child welfare record. So thinking about creating, I think that we actually need to create new entities that do this, and then look at this. We pay for police, we pay for departments of public health. It's a values question. Maybe that's Pollyanna-ish, but yeah, it's a values question.
Other thoughts from the panel?
100% agree. It's a moral contract, right? So you value the things you care about. And if we're saying we care about people, if we care about the well-being of our community members, you will find a revenue source to support that. And you won't sit back and struggle with how we're going to pay. It will become the priority for an administration. And I think to your point, there are several burgeoning new revenue streams that cities have access to. Now, where do those dollars go to is the real question. So I think it's a follow the money, and we'll see where people's hearts and minds really are.
Please join me in thanking our terrific panel.